When the Prophet brought the teaching of Islam, he brought a teaching of equality, where the rich and poor were now equal. Men and women had an equal status in society.
He was telling the world two things. One was how to treat daughters with respect and how to respect women in general, and also the fact that in times to come, he will be indebted to Fatima and her progeny for the propagation and survival of his divine message. The message of love, of equality, of justice, of peace, not a message of what Islam has now is interpreted to be.
At a very young age, she accomplished so much. In 18 years of life, we find that she leaves a legacy like none other. She is one woman who is the axis between both imamat and nabuwat.
To have someone like Fatima Zahra is a treasure. It's really something that, instead of having it only in books and words, and you should be like this, and you should aspire to be so, when you actually see a person becoming like that, it really encourages you and tells you that this is possible. It's possible to be generous like Fatima. It's possible to be wise like Fatima. It's possible to be firm in faith like Fatima.
O people, know that I am Fatima, and my father is Muhammad. I will say that repeatedly and continuously. I do not say what I am saying mistakenly, nor do I do what I do aimlessly. A messenger has come to you from among yourselves. So if you know him and you know who he is, you will see that he is my father, not the father of any of your women.
With the days mounting up since the death of the Prophet, the authority or the ability to practice authority by the first Khalifa was increasing. Some of his men were actively forcing people to give bay'ah, some of the men were seeking allegiance with various tribes, some were offering positions, some were courting the warriors and soldiers like Osama, for example, ibn Zayd. And so within a matter of days, the first Khalifa became in such a position that he was not so much afraid of opposition anymore.
We find that several attempts were made by the illegitimate government to gain homage from Imam Ali in order to gain his allegiance, to so-called validate the claim that they had over the Muslim Ummah.
We must stop this theological opposition. We must come out and force Ali ibn Abi Talib and whoever is in his house to give bay'ah to you.
Days went by, and the people at Saqifa began to realize that everybody had sworn allegiance, but Imam Ali hadn't. So they sent, the first caliph sent the future second caliph and Khalid ibn Walid and his own slave called Qanfus. And they went over to the house of Fatima Salamullah alayha.
This force that was under the leadership of Qanfus, the slave of the second caliph, came to the door of Imam Ali. When they asked permission to enter, we hear that Imam Ali refused this permission.
And so There was a call out to Amir al-Mu'mineen, come out of your house, O Banu Hashim, O supporters of Ali, come out and give bay'ah. There was no response.
And so they go back towards the mosque and they tell the Khalif and the would-be second Khalif that permission was not granted. And it is here that they said, you will go back and seek permission to enter, only if you do not gain permission, you will then enter with force. When they return and they ask for permission to enter, it is now that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra responds, and she says, you are prohibited from entering my house.
And Fatima al-Zahra, being that the Prophet had built this house for her, being that this was referred to as the house of Fatima, stood up and went to the door in a way to say, look, your argument might be with Ali ibn Abi Talib, but this is my house. And trying to remind them that where they were standing and who they were threatening. Fatima is a part of me, the Prophet says. For whoever loves her, loves me. Fatima, when she stands, has a part of me in her. It's as if Fatima is the Prophet in a situation. So when Fatima went to respond to them, when she stood by the door and began to talk to them, she's saying, I am Rasulullah talking to you. I am not just Fatima al-Zahra. I'm not just the wife of Ali. I am the Prophet. You dare approach me in this way? Reminding them of the seriousness of the situation.
And so we hear that they light the door, Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra alight, and they use force to force this door open.
Fatima al-Abiha was near the door with the children playing in the court area, in the courtyard. She saw the fumes coming in, and she rushed to the door.
And he says, I will enter. And he asks somebody to bring a torch of fire. And he says, I will enter forcefully. And she says, the daughter of the Prophet is in this house. And he says, so what? And at that time, it is said that he sets the door on fire and he pushes the door against Fatima al-Zahra.
And we hear that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra is stuck between the door and the wall.
She falls flat on her face and she miscarriages her baby Mohsin.
Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra narrates herself that the second Khalif uses the whip of Gunfuz, and he uses this whip on her to such an extent that she is left with a ring mark upon her.
The door was heavy. She couldn't come out from underneath the door, and she called out for help.
Amir al-Mu'mineen, seeing what was happening, seeing the injury to Fatima al-Zahra, stood and grabbed some of these attackers. And he was in a position to defeat them one by one. And he, at that moment, had a decision. Does he physically deal with the situation, or does he remember the words of the Prophet?
Imam Ali rushed over to help and advised her what Rasulullah had advised him, to be patient.
And he decided that force was not the order of the day. Force would lead to damaging consequences.
This is one of the saddest occurrences in Islamic history, where a lady, the daughter of the Prophet, who the Prophet has said about her that whoever angers Fatima angers me and Allah, and whoever pleases Fatima pleases me and Allah.
Women should never be hit by anyone, let alone a woman who was so caring towards her neighbor and whose father has done so much for the society.
This lady is being not only pushed to the ground, her house is being forcefully attacked, she's pushed to the ground, her baby is miscarried, she's whipped, she falls flat on her face, and they are now forcing her husband to pay allegiance to a man who does not deserve to be the Khalifa.
They enter the house, they take Imam Ali and they take him dragging to the mosque.
And Salman and Ammar, according to the tradition, were there. They wanted to draw the swords, but Imam Ali advised them not to do so. Imam Ali forbade them to draw the sword.
Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, in the state that she is in, takes both of her children, Imam Hassan and Imam Husayn, and she leaves the house and she says, do you wish to make me a widow? I swear by Allah, I will take myself to the grave of my father and I will call out to my Lord. Imam Ali, on hearing this, tells Salman, go to Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra and tell her to not do this, because I swear I see the outskirts of Medina raising as a result of this. It is because of the stance that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra takes that we are told that they then release Imam Ali.
Fatima al-Zahra used intelligent opposition. The methods of debating and arguments had reached an endpoint where they were of no use anymore. So she used intelligent opposition. What do we mean? Fatima al-Zahra used mourning as a sign of respect to the Prophet and his holy family, as a sign of the grave dangers the Muslims were in, and as a sign of saying, I preoccupy myself with the rest of mankind while you worry about how to get power. From the minute the Prophet has died, we, the Ahl Bayt, have been busy with what? The Prophet, the Ahl Bayt, the Quran, where you, the opposition, are interested in gaining power, forcing people to give bay'ah, attacking this person, attacking that person.
She recites a eulogy on the grave of her father, and she says that there has been such incidents and news after you that if you were here, you would be saddened too. She says, goodness has left this earth, and we miss you as much. We miss you being here like a parched land misses rain.
The sun has darkened, the sky has darkened, and the daylight has gone from my life. The earth tremors and trembles at the passing away of the one who was sent as mercy unto mankind.
Ya Rasulullah, look what your ummah has done to us. Ya Rasulullah, wish that you were here to tell your companions, to tell them off in a way, that you would be able to stop them doing what they were doing. Ya Rasulullah, after our position that we were the most beloved household, now the people of Medina, none of them view us with respect.
Those very neighbors whom she had been feeding free and through her hard labor of milling barley seeds on her kwan and feeding them, those began to complain to Imam Ali that they couldn't bear to hear Fatima's voice.
Her house led into the mosque of the Prophet. So when she would cry for her father day and night, the people would hear her cry, and it started to affect them. And they started to ask Imam Ali to ask her to stop crying.
So Imam Ali takes the request to her, and she says, how long will I be with them? My duration of stay is short. And so Imam Ali builds a house for her outside Baqi. And in the morning, she would go with her children to the House of Sorrows, is what it becomes known as, and weep. And then at sunset, Imam Ali would collect her and bring her home.
It was destroyed later on, but until today, we say that Bayt al-Ahzan is in our hearts. All the Muslims will have Bayt al-Ahzan in their hearts, a place where we will meet and gather, mourn Fatima al-Zahra, and remember the difficulties that the Ahl Bayt and especially Fatima went through, and to say that we are in opposition. Whoever is against the household of the Prophet, we are opposed to.
Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra would remember her father a lot. And so Bilal, after the death of the Holy Prophet, had vowed that he would never recite the adhan again. Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra wanted to be reminded of her father, and so she requested that Bilal recite the adhan, and it was only because this request came from her that he said that he would.
In her last days, she missed her father very much. She would ask Bilal, who was the one who would recite adhan in the time of the Prophet, she would ask him, please recite the adhan. When he would say Allahu Akbar, her body would start to change. When he would say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, she would faint and collapse. The people would say, Bilal, oh Bilal, stop. Lady Fatima is unconscious now. She would regain her consciousness and she would ask him, Bilal, recite again. But he would not recite for fear of Fatima's life.
So the emotional side of Fatima's mourning is very clear. But with that, she's delivering a message. She tells the people, the women of the people of Medina, that your husbands have let down Islam. How can you be married to these people and not say anything to them?
She tells them, she gives them insight into what will happen. She says that if you carry on like this, making the wrong decisions, then you will see evil and suffering in your life.
And these women would go back and they would tell their men, Fatima is not happy with you. Fatima is angry with you. And we heard what the Prophet said, if Fatima is angry, Allah is angry. And these men would then come and plead with Fatima, oh, please forgive us. She said, forgive you for what? You haven't done anything to be forgiven for. You haven't repented in a way. You've done something wrong, but you haven't changed it. You haven't repented.
The first and second Caliph were not unaware of the fact that they had angered Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. And so they want to go back and see her in order to make amends to what they have done.
They begged to sit with Amir al-Mu'mineen and see Fatima. Amir al-Mu'mineen relented because he is of a generous type. When people beg of him, he will accept. The first and second Khalifa begged to see Fatima al-Zahra. She refused. Amir al-Mu'mineen, because of his generous nature, he finally accepted. And Fatima said, this is your house, Ali ibn Abi Talib. I am your wife. I will listen, but I will not be happy with her.
And so an audience is granted with Bibi Fatima, and they say that they offer her salams, and she does not respond.
And Fatima, salamu alayha, turned her face away. She did not acknowledge. Now, it is incumbent upon every Muslim to acknowledge the greetings, unless the other person who has gone way beyond the pale of Islam.
Which is a very big hint. Those who are interested in fiqh, interested in some of the discussions on this, will understand the significance. To not give salam back to somebody is a big deal.
Then they apologized, and she did not answer back. She did not say anything, she just maintained her silence. And her anger was visible, was very apparent from the fact that she refused to acknowledge their greetings.
It is at this point that Sayyidah Fatima Zahra responds, and she says, "Did you hear my father say that my pleasure was his pleasure and my displeasure was his displeasure, and if you angered me, then you angered him?" And he replied in the affirmative, and she says, "With Allah as my witness and the angels, on the day of judgment I will complain to my father and I will say to him that you have angered me."
So this is a statement that Fatima has left for us for 1400 years later, for whatever amount of time later, for us to know who were the supporters of Ahlul Bayt, who were the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, who were the ones that loved the Prophet and the holy household and loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who were the ones that were willing to go against the household of the Prophet, the Book of Allah, the Prophet himself, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Because we find that the toll of the grief of her father on her physical body made her weak, and through the brutality of the attack on the door and the breaking of the ribs and the loss of Mohsin, Sayyidah Fatima Zahra was very weak, and she had become mortally ill.
And Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "I watched as the flower of Rasulullah that he took and gave her hand to me and said in the final moments, 'Ya Ali, she is my trust unto you. I'm trusting Fatima to you. Be careful with her, protect her.'" He said, "I watched as this flower that I was given, slowly this flower began to wither. Fatima's face changed, her health, the way she walked. The Muslims say when she walked to the mosque of the Prophet, she would walk and her clothes would drag because she could not stand like she used to stand. And now she was crouching slowly when she walked."
When the signs of her death were approaching, she called Ayman and Asma close to her, and she asked for them to call Imam Ali. When Imam Ali came to her, she says, "Oh cousin, I wish to tell you the matters of my heart." She says, "I feel that the day of my death is drawing close and I will be rejoined with my father."
And said to him, "Ya Ali, my death is near and I have some things to say to you." And Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "Please, O Fatima, say what you have, and I will do my best to heed every one of your words and to carry out actions on each one of your words." She asked, "O Amir al-Mu'mineen, have I ever disobeyed you in a matter? Have I behaved in a way in which you wanted to tell me that you are pleased with me?" She was asking in a way to affirm that in her life she acted perfect.
She says, "Oh cousin, since we have lived together, I have never angered you, I have never betrayed you, I have never lied to you." And Imam Ali says that you are more conscious of God, you are more pious than this, and as a result, I would never censure you.
And he was heartbroken, very sad. And he said, "I want you to know one thing, what my will is going to be. My will is that you should marry."
And Fatima says that first and foremost, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, this house must have a wife and a mother in it. So after my death, you will marry.
And that you should have children who will protect my Husayn in Karbala. And you should, because my father has told me what's going to happen to Husayn. Of all the children that you love him most. Of all the children that you love Zainab most. Because of the suffering they have to endure in years to come.
And she says, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I want you and no one else to give the ghusl. But to give the ghusl over my clothes. For I am tahira mutahhara, I am being thoroughly purified. And so you give the ghusl for my body over my clothes without removing my clothes."
She says to him that these people have really hurt me, so when I die, please don't let them come to my funeral. bury me at night so that they cannot attend and they do not know where I am buried, as a sign of my anger and my displeasure towards them.
That's my will to you. Then she talked about she glorified God and talked about the message of Rasulullah, how important it was, and of the imamat and wilayah of Imam Ali himself. She was the first person to really fight for Imam Ali and for his rights. And in fact, it was not his right because it was a right ordained by God. For the continuation of the true religion of Islam, it was necessary for Imam Ali to have taken over after Rasulullah.
Fatima al-Zahra, on the day of her death, from the morning she had more energy. And it was as if she wanted to go out and having fully prepared herself and those around her for her death. And so from the morning she was able to return to her household duties, which she hadn't been able to do for some time.
That day, she called Asma bint Umays and said, I have done all the household work. I have washed children's clothes, their food is ready, and all the house is clean. I'm going to lie down. I'm in my bed, but before that I'm going to say my prayers.
If you do not hear me, invoke on me, and if I do not reply, then know that I have already met with my Lord.
And so Fatima enters her room and she begins her prayers. And the narrations say this was occurring after Salat al-Maghrib, between the Maghrib and the Isha prayer, so in the evening. And Asma narrates that I was elsewhere in the house and I could hear Fatima, a weak voice, but I could hear her voice in dua and praise.
And that's what happened. That she went to the room, performed her prayer, her salat, and then she called out 3 times, Allahu Akbar. And Asma bint Umays understood what had happened.
Asma calls Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra's name and there was no response. She then calls, O daughter of Rasulullah, through all the titles of the Prophet, and again there was no response.
I saw her in her mihrab, in her prayer position, and that she had fallen on her side. And so I went and uncovered her face, and I saw that Fatima's soul had departed. Fatima had died. At that moment, I did not know what to do, because though she had prepared me for her death, I would not know how to respond to al-Hasan and al-Husayn. What was I to say to Amir al-Mu'mineen?
And it is at this point that Imam Hassan and Imam Husayn enter, and they inquire as to where their mother is. Asma doesn't respond. They then go to look for Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. When they find her, we are told that they cling on to the body of their mother and they weep bitterly. And at which point, both sons go to the mosque, because Imam Ali was not in the house. They go to the mosque in order to inform their father of the demise of their mother.
They say he was standing with 2 of his companions. They told him, our mother Fatima has died. This great warrior of Islam, this great hero of Islam, this man who brought down the gates of Khaybar, fell down on his face, the riwayat say. And water was born and splashed on his face, so he regained his consciousness. And he says, before, when I used to have bad news, I used to share it, and Fatima made me comfortable. She would comfort me. But now, who do I turn to with this bad news?
Obviously, he was extremely grief-stricken, extremely heartbroken. His 2 children were because she was very young. There were various traditions state early 20s to late 20s, no more.